first musical experience was climbing all over an old electronic organ that my mother had. You know, hold down as many notes as I could, and nobody ever taught me to play it. I just spent hours and hours and hours playing with it as a toy. The idea of doing music for a living never crossed my mind. When I was in the 4th grade, I stumbled into the violin quite literally because I had a vague notion that maybe I'd like to play a trumpet. Because my brother had a trumpet when he was younger, and I would occasionally play with it. And so there was an announcement over my school intercom: kids interested in joining the orchestra, go to the lunch cafeteria. So I went to the cafeteria. I was a bright boy. It was the 3rd or 4th grade, I think, and I knew that there was a trumpet was part of the orchestra. Well, unless you're in Clayton County, Georgia, because the orchestra class means stringed instruments. Trumpets are in the band, you see. So I got to the cafeteria and I said, wait a second, there's no trumpet here. They're talking about these instruments and violin, viola, what's a viola? Cello and bass. They're talking, which one of these do you want to sign up for? And I'm like, there's no trumpet, but I don't want to go back to class. Violin was the instrument out of the 4 that I actually recognized. So thus the illustrious beginnings of my musical career. I took lessons in the public schools. I accelerated very quickly. They put me in the high school orchestra when I was in the 6th grade, but it was a very poor program by the time I was in middle school, junior high. It was in Georgia at the time. I had a teacher whose only credentials was a bachelor's in clarinet performance. Around the time I was in the 10th grade, I realized I was playing the same music I was playing in the 6th grade and was learning nothing new. I dropped out in favor of taking some acting lessons, and then I had an epiphany when I was 17 years old. And that was, it changed everything. Like a bolt out of the blue. I hadn't been taking lessons, and I was going to play in a Pentecostal church for a Christmas program, and so I'd gotten my violin out, dusted it off, and I found myself in an old cemetery because I lied to my parents about where I was, and I was supposed to spend the night with my girlfriend because her parents were out of town. I'd gotten in a fight with my girlfriend, so I couldn't be at her house, and I couldn't go home because my parents thought I was spending the night with my friend Dave. All of these forces led me to be alone in a cemetery in southwest Atlanta, or southeast Atlanta, called Southview. And it's an old abandoned industrial park kind of part of town, really old cemetery. And I had nothing but a pickup truck and my violin, and I thought, well, I'll practice for this Christmas review. And I started playing, and I couldn't stop. And the music that was coming out was effortless, and it wasn't coming off of a piece of paper, and it wasn't the Christmas carols I was going to play. It was just music, and it was such an invigorating, exciting experience that for the next year or so I would only go back to this cemetery to play because I thought that was the only place that this could happen, and I still had no idea that this would become my life. And I went to college for law, and then I started street performing around the same time to try to make money to put myself through school. And again, I started street performing as a mime. It never occurred to me anybody would give me money to play the violin, except I was doing this living statue routine where I would sort of hold the violin and make creaking noises and sort of start going like I did in Evil Sarah's burlesque routine on Friday night. It was sort of a throwback to that, where I would creak to life and play something, and then I would stop. I realized I was making more money when I was playing the violin than when I was standing still. So I ditched the whole mime thing and just started playing the violin, which led me to drop out of college because I was cutting classes to stand in the corner and play the violin, because it was this same experience where I never played the same thing twice. Music was just coming out of me, and I didn't know how it happened or why it happened, but I was so excited by it. There was nothing I'd rather be doing, and that led to a career in music. I street performed for 7 years, almost as the entirety of my income and lifestyle, and then I moved on, played in bands. Well, in terms of the great greatest instruments in the world. I was left in a room with an instrument called the Firebird. It's a Stradivarius from 1718, one of the best surviving examples of his work. And out of an unlikely friendship, I struck up with someone in the violin business. And that instrument's worth, gosh, at least $10 million, which is absurd. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't sell my organs and pay for the thing if I dropped it, or scratched it. But and that was like French kissing the Mona Lisa. I can't describe it any other way. Singular work of art, like Michelangelo's David, unrepeatable, unduplicatable perfection in an acoustic machine. But as far as experiences, I ran across a lot of instruments in the violin business that weren't necessarily the nicest or the best. They weren't the oldest or the best made. They weren't the most famous violins. But every so often I ran across one that had something to say. And those moments I couldn't replace with anything. Just this, this almost frightening expression of, what am I playing? This isn't my music. I've improvised my whole life, since that epiphany when I was 17. And it was like that experience, walking through the cemetery and playing and going, where's this coming from? I'm just making this up. I can play anything I want. This is so exhilarating. But with certain violins, it was, okay, now it's not that magical experience. This is something new that only happens with this specific violin under certain circumstances, and then this music hits me, and it's almost like a fever dream or something. It's like something like being possessed. There was one violin in particular that I've still not actually played because it's not playable. It belonged to a man named John Freeman, who died in 1870 on his way home from the theater where he worked, and the violin was thrown into a canal with him when he was murdered. And encountering that instrument, touching it, it's magical in the worst way imaginable. And to this day, I still have encounters with John Freeman, or something like John Freeman. I don't know how to describe it. Even when Jill and I were in Victoria in British Columbia, long after I'd found the rightful owner of the violin and managed to get it back to her, because I hated having this thing around. It's just it's a little tiny haunted house you can't quite get rid of. And we played a theater in British Columbia, an audience of strangers who know nothing about me, never heard this story. And in intermission, a woman says, well, I'd like you to meet my friend. She says she sees dead people. And I said, that sounds great. Tell me about this. And she goes, well, I don't want to freak you out, but I see people when you play, and there's this woman in a blue dress, and she dances around and around and around you. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And she goes, and there's this man, he stands behind you, and he's soaking wet. And I'm like, oh, really? And she's like, she's standing behind you right now. And then I went and hid in the bathroom. I couldn't even tell her, the story. So there are some, some really powerful things about old instruments. I can't put my finger on it. I'm very skeptical, but I know, this is an entirely subjective experience, but when I play certain instruments, the music I play is not my own. And I see things, I hear things, I can't describe them, I can't codify them, and it might be my fevered imagination, but even if it's all an illusion, it's the most incredible illusion. It's the best proof I have of anything supernatural in this world.